increase centigrade in the world temperature. In Africa, that's 200 million people dead. 200 million people will die because of this. And China remains the #1 vulnerable country. And this is non-binding. Now, you always are fine to blame Washington. That's okay, that's easy. This is an addicted, and I saw them in Durban this last 2 weeks. Sabotage, that's all they want to do. This one, US State Department, he was the lead negotiator, Todd Stern. And you ask him, what about the climate debt? The US has polluted so much. Do you owe? No, I just categorically reject that. No. He rejects polluter pays. That's a very simple principle of bourgeois economics. Now we have, thanks to WikiLeaks, thank you Julian Assange, thank you Bradley Manning, for telling us how they work. They work through bribery and corruption. We saw that the last 2 weeks. The man down there is Meles Zenawi, and he sold out Africa, the Ethiopian tyrant, by changing all the demands. But even in the Maldives, they were so strong. They had their cabinet meeting wearing scuba gear. Why? Because their island is sinking. They're going to have their meetings of their government underwater. But $50 million, they were able to buy the Maldives and make them support the Copenhagen Accord. Straight bribery. This is how power politics was playing out. These are the guys, of course, that owe the money, right? These are the big ones, polluting. And these are this is again, the major polluters. These are the countries that are affected, the peoples affected, and they're not the same. The people who are being destroyed did not cause climate change. And there will be massive destruction. The money that has to be paid is called the Green Climate Fund, and they say there will be $100 billion per year. And the man here, the co-chair, is from South Africa, and he's the most important neoliberal in Africa. Maybe in Egypt you have, what was his name from the Alexandria Library? Sarah Yeldon, right? Yeah, so that's a competition, but this one is still very important. He nearly became the IMF managing director this year. But the 100 billion is not enough. We're not getting the money to the people affected. It's going to the tyrants. There are going to be false solutions and private sector recipients. And then carbon trading, which Sam talked about this morning, I'll come back to, is the Green Climate Fund revenue source because the North won't pay the bill because of the austerity problems. And then this is the worst. This guy is in charge. What's his name? Robert Zoellick, president of the World Bank. If you're from China, I hope you protect your pandas against this. You never know what he'll do. This is his qualifications. After his predecessor was fired for nepotism, giving his girlfriend a fancy job at State Department, he was, before that, Goldman Sachs' #1 banker. Was that good for the world economy? No, not from Goldman Sachs. He was #2 in the State Department. He was the US trade rep to the World Trade Organization when it fell apart. He was the vote counter in chief in Florida for George W. Bush. That was an absolute travesty. He was a senior political advisor to Enron. He was a project for a new American century, that's the neocons. He was #2 manager of Fannie Mae, where they invented subprime mortgage. I could go on. So this guy breaks everything. They went to Cancun after Copenhagen, and they tried to build up these carbon markets. This was corruption, fraud, theory. This is not being emotional. This is being empirical. This is what happens in the carbon markets. And the carbon markets have basically died. And they were originally born because of this man, Al Gore. And he said that in Kyoto, he would get the United States to sign the deal if the carbon markets were established. Because Al Gore said that this European Union has adopted this US innovation and is making it work effectively there. Well, what was the vote in the US Senate for the Kyoto Protocol? Does anybody know? It was 95-0 against. So he was just lying to us in Kyoto. And this making it work effectively, when you see the carbon market going up and down and up, it was a top around 35 euros a ton. And now, today, if we take it forward, it's down around €5.20. And the Union Bank of Switzerland said, no, it's going down to €3. And you just cannot use these markets to transfer funds and incentivize a post-carbon investment strategy for energy, for transport, for new production. This is the typical carbon market in the third world, where we have, in, say, Brazil, the largest timber plantation, plantar. And it's one of these clean development mechanisms. But this we call the green desert. You see, what grows underneath? Nothing. It's, you know, plantar. Terrible place, right? And these trees die after 7 years because they're put into charcoal for pig iron for the Brazilian auto industry. And these projects are getting money as if they're trying to sequester, to suck out the carbon. This is the scamming that's going on. Can this system, the reducing emissions through deforestation and forest degradation, work? Tom Goldtooth, Indigenous Environmental Network, says these red-type projects have caused land grabs, the kinds of things Ibrahim is describing, the killings, the violent evictions, forced displacement, violations of human rights, threats to cultural survival, militarization, and servitude. And what about reforming them? The idea that you could maybe get indigenous people protected, free, prior, and informed consent, is a great gamble. I doubt that will happen. The idea you can keep the forests away from the carbon markets and offsets, doubtful. And to define a tree as within a genuine forest, not a timber plantation, we can't even win that. So this is a very, very divisive system, RED, that I think is something all of us who are working on climate justice have to really focus on. And we've had some very strong leadership from Bolivia. And as you said, Pedro, I mean, Ecuador is a mixed bag, right? Lots of difficulties in sorting out what to do there. But between Bolivia and Ecuador, and maybe Cuba on post-carbon energy, we have some great examples and visions. Here's Evo Morales' Cochabamba conference on the rights of Mother Earth, and this was in April last year. This is the set of demands that most of the people in the climate justice movement believe in, that the North must reduce 50% of greenhouse gases immediately, I mean by 2017, otherwise it's a total disaster. Then we go above 1.5 degrees and many more. We're now 390 parts per million. Acknowledging the climate debt and paying that from the North, 6% of GDP. Respect for Mother Earth, the Mother Earth rights, indigenous peoples' rights, a court of climate justice to punish the United States and the others that are Canada, Russia, Japan that are dropping out of the system, rejecting these carbon markets, rejecting the red that commodified forests, promoting major changes in the consumption patterns, and ending intellectual property rights for climate technologies. And I think I should add that this is really happening. This slogan, leave the coal in the hole and the oil in the soil. The oil in the soil is being kept in the Niger Delta. And that's because of activists who have not just said, not in my backyard, NIMBY it's called, but not in the planet's backyard. Let's get the oil in the Niger Delta left under the delta because the planet will burn. Again, the Amazonian project of CONAI, Acción Ecológica, in the Yasuni Park. The British climate camp, Australian rising tide blocking Newcastle exports. In Norway, they had a victory this year in Lofoten. There's a big fight over the tar sands, and that was successful about 3 weeks ago in getting Barack Obama not to import the tar sands, at least to temporarily delay that. And even in the US, the worst country for trying to do this activism, they've actually stopped all the new coal-fired power plants, maybe with one exception. And that's because of community activism and the Sierra legal strategies, very impressive. They've stopped new incineration and closed the largest one. They've stopped the expansion of Chevron in its largest refinery in the world, near San Francisco. Lots of amazing examples we could talk about, especially with coal. And I hope in China and in East Asia in general, India is a particularly a hot place. This pictures of Thailand, 10,000 people telling their government to stop the coal. Coal is the worst. South Africa has a huge example here, and this is where we were, in the center of the world, the last 3 weeks. I think I have 1 minute left, is that right? So I'll just tell you what happened. It was a conference of the Party 17 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, turned into a conference of polluters, the COP. That's the way we ended up describing what happened. It was a terrible tragedy of basically confirming, as Pablo Solon, the Bolivian ambassador, put it, this is genocide and ecocide premeditated. It's partly because these guys just had their heads in the sand, but in fact they also knew what they were doing. It wasn't that they were ignorant. They are there to emit more. Each of the national delegations appeared to be negotiating to take more of the available space. Just let's emit more and more. Sorry about these rude cartoons. These are what come out. You know, you're dealing with young kids, activists. You need to make them laugh a bit. I know they don't go over well here. Here we've got the most beautiful reflection of how our vision is, on the first instant, defensive, because we do need to keep the oil in the soil and the coal in the hole. This is from Acción Ecológica in Quito. But there's something more offensive, which is a drive for a better society. And I thought it was great that in South Africa we could host this absolutely impossible struggle against the odds. And of course, we lost in this round. But you know, we lost a lot of other battles until finally we could get rid of apartheid. Nobody thought we'd do it by 1994, but finally it was done. And that's really the challenge before us, to defeat climate apartheid. And I know you'll be with us. Thank you very much.